Well, those were the good old days when people used to cheer him down the street. Just 18 months ago, when he was fresh-faced and exuberant after winning the presidency of France with a popular movement assembled and driven by his own personal energy and magnetism. But today, a very different story. Even his closest confidants say he's looking exhausted and is losing weight. His popularity sinking like a stone. Even his wife is calling him arrogant. What is going on with France's President Emmanuel Macron? Let's find out together here on the Nexus. Hello, I'm Matthew Moore, and today in the Nexus we have a rendezvous with France's youngest leader since Napoleon Bonaparte, the ever-energetic Emmanuel Macron. Well, he certainly thinks highly of himself, but after 18 months of resignations, faux pas, and a shocking scandal involving his bodyguard, the French people are less than impressed.
Begin with that breaking news out of France. The world watching the high-stakes presidential election there.
He got a bigger total than even they expected.
It wasn't even close, was it? The polls finally coming out at about 66% for Emmanuel Macron, 34% for Marine Le Pen.
This election testing the strength of the populist wave that put Donald Trump in office and took Britain out of the EU in the Brexit vote.
Many of these voters thought the soul of France itself was at stake, so this victory is especially sweet. Macron, at just 39, becomes France's youngest leader since Napoleon.
Tout le monde nous disait que c'était impossible. Mais ils ne connaissaient pas la France.
Once he was the exciting young president who swept to victory. Now, Macron's popularity has plummeted.
His suave performance on the international stage has done nothing to help his image at home.
People drawing comparisons with Napoleon himself, others are likened him to the pharaohs, even the Roman gods.
Emmanuel Macron is perceived as a so-called Jupiterian president, a sort of a god who's above the fray, he's above it all.
Macron is the president of the rich.
French people might not be buying it.
The French president has announced divisive labour and military reforms.
These demonstrators say they will undermine the basic rights of workers.
Et je ne céderai rien, ni aux fainéants, ni aux cyniques, ni aux extrêmes.
President Emmanuel Macron scolded a teenager after the boy addressed him by his nickname Manu.
A man with a police helmet beating up protesters.
This man is not riot police. He's actually Alexandre Benalla, the man in charge of Emmanuel Macron's security during his presidential campaign.
This is being described as the biggest political crisis of his time as president.
How could this person, who is one of the president's personal security detail, be granted permission to go beat people up in a protest and then be given a slap on the wrist?
French opposition Conservative parties have called for a vote of no confidence in the president over his failure to punish Alexandre Benalla.
Tout ça est quand même beaucoup une tempête dans un verre d'eau.
Well, the French president is being criticized by his political opponents for how he responded to this young man who is jobless. He said that if I crossed the street, I'd find a job for you.
Vive la France!
Well, lots to talk about there. We have two French journalists with us now. We have Van Megadouchian and also Alexis Poulain. You could probably tell from his background where they are. Paris. Alexis, if I could start with you. You know, when he started, he had a rating, an approval rating of something like 60%. Well, now you take a look at it, it's dipping to underneath 30%. What is going so wrong for him? And by the way, is it unusual to be so unpopular at this point in your presidency, Alexis?
It's not unusual. I mean, what's unusual is the speed to which Emmanuel Macron fall down to the depths in the polls. He was walking on water during the first year. He thought it would be easy. Everything seemed to work very well for him. And then came in politics. And you know, in politics, it never happens the way it should happen. So he's very young, as you said. but also he has no experience in politics, unless being advisor to former French President François Hollande, and he was a minister for a few months just to launch his campaign for the presidency.
Why do you think he is such a big disappointment?
I think it's a big disappointment because he promised a lot during the campaign. He said that it would be the new world, he would change everything within 6 months or a year, and he just realized, and the French realized, that it doesn't happen. So far, we got the figures of unemployment, they're still rising up. We got a lot of reforms that haven't happened, or when happening are not great for French people. And there's a lot of talks, but not so much about the action.
I just want to show you a picture from, around about 18 months ago, and you compare what he looks like then to now, and it's true, he does look quite exhausted. I mean, Van, we're told his closest confidants are saying that he's working endlessly in an inhuman schedule, sleeping 3-4 hours a night. We know that he's impatient to reform and move France forward, but what are the French making of all this?
The campaign is over. Now the serious business is back, and Emmanuel Macron became this type of a person. He developed into this politician who became bitter. He started acting a little bit like a professor at a school who's tired of his career. His students are not up to their task.
You know, Van, as I was saying, his confidants are saying he's working himself to death. I mean, you have to give him A for effort, but what about achievement in his policies? What grade would you give him there?
Look, it's too soon to give a grade to Emmanuel Macron. There are some good signs that the economy is improving, regardless of whatever is happening with the unemployment numbers. The good signs are, one of them is by pure chance because of everything that is going on with the Brexit negotiations. A lot of hope in Paris is that with the uncertainty in the UK, European companies, European banks will find more comfort in Paris. This is giving a lot of boost. So, and at the same time, President Macron's attempt to push for more, investments in the tech sector, this is helping give Paris a better image, a more modern image. But will this work?
Alexei, if I could come back to you for a moment, if you could just, in a word, say which of his policies have been the biggest failure so far?
I think the reform on pensions have been a failure because pensioners were core to the voters that put him in power, and they are very disappointed about what he decided. Basically, pensioners in France have lost a lot of their bargain to buy, and that's one of the failures. The other one, I would say, is on the international stage. You see, France was supposed to be the middleman in many dossiers, and in the end, is just aligning with the NATO, with the US, and there's not so much about this French diplomacy flair that we used to have in the past.
Okay, let's move on to the biggest scandal of his presidency so far. His bodyguard attacking a couple of protesters. The incident was damaging, but the way Macron reacted to it was perhaps even more damaging. Is that right? Can you just explain that, Alexei?
Sure. Well, what happened is that the bodyguard was hitting people in the street that were manifesting in Paris. And the Élysée and Macron decided to cover it up until Le Monde, a French daily, put the video out and said this is what happened. And then all the defense line, it was communication crisis, the choice of Emmanuel Macron was to lie and to ask his team and the member of the parliament from his party and people at the top of the administration to lie in front of the committee of the parliament that was inquiring about this. So this was terrible crisis communication, and it's still there now. People can't trust Emmanuel Macron because of this.
Well, and perhaps this is why they're speculating and making allegations that the president, who's married, was actually having an affair with the bodyguard. Here's Macron's response.
Alexandre Benalla n'a jamais détenu le code du code. Alexandre Benalla n'a jamais occupé un 300 mètres carrés à l'Allemagne. Alexandre Benalla n'a jamais gagné 10 000 euros. Alexandre Benalla, lui non plus, n'a jamais été mon amant.
Oh, it's a bit odd. Let's ask Van. Van, why is the president in a position, or put in a position rather, where he has to make that kind of defence?
regardless of what French people think, that we should leave people have their own private lives, that we should not interfere. But everybody speculates, everybody, day in, day out, people talk about what's the relationship between Emmanuel Macron and Brigitte Macron. Why does he have this special relationship with somebody who is much older than him?
The French are quite gossipy. Is that what you're saying, basically?
The gossip continues day in, day out. Everybody, every day, continue to talk about this.
Well, okay, let's stay with Macron, the man. And one of the biggest complaints about him is that he's arrogant. However, you can see why he might be full of himself. His education is as elite as they come. Nanterre University, President Sarkozy went there. Sciences Po, Hollande and Chirac also went there. The ultra-selective École Nationale d'Administration, only about 80 graduates a year, and they're all pretty much guaranteed to run the country in one way or another. 7 prime ministers and 4 presidents. And then there's the fact that he's only ever run for election once, bypassing the whole local political scene to become the president on his first try. But his self-confidence seems to be turning into hubris when he compared himself, and others have done the same, to Jupiter, the Roman king of gods. And then there was that incident with the teenager who was singing a socialist anthem and calling him Manu.
Ça va? C'est bien. Mais ça va. Je la connais. Ça va, Manu? Non, je suis pas ton copain. Non. Voilà. Tu es là, dans une cérémonie officielle, tu te comportes comme il faut. Donc tu peux faire l'imbécile, mais aujourd'hui c'est la Marseillaise et le chant des partisans. Tu m'appelles Monsieur le Président de la République ou Monsieur. D'accord? Voilà. C'est bien.
I won't do that again, will he? Alexei, can I ask you, do you think President Macron is arrogant?
Well, a lot of people think so, and it shows whenever he talks to French people. Either he's trying hard to be close to people, but it doesn't very work well. You had, of course, this young man when he was pretending to say, you know, you'd call me Mr. President. But then there was this guy who was looking for a job, and he just said, oh, wait, I'll find you a job. You just have to cross the street and you'd find a job in a restaurant. Another example when he talked to pensioners saying, oh, please stop complaining. It's not about complaining. We need to make this country great again, kind of thing. So, yes, there's a lot of this. And not only with like people of the street, but it seems that he's very arrogant to his government and the people around him. And that was one of the main concerns of Gérard Collomb, former interior minister, who resigned, saying that he couldn't talk anymore and advise Emmanuel Macron.
Well, let's
one of the concerns he had.
Let's get into those resignations, Alexei. You know, whether you think he's arrogant or not, something is driving his ministers to quit. 3 big names so far. Here's the Environment Minister quitting live on air without even warning his boss.
Je vais prendre pour la première fois la décision la plus difficile de ma vie. Je ne veux plus me mentir. Je ne veux pas donner l'illusion que ma présence au gouvernement signifie qu'on est à la hauteur sur ces enjeux-là. Et donc je prends la décision de quitter le gouvernement.
Well, 2 months later, the Interior Minister, one of his earliest and most important backers, Gérard Collomb, also resigned, even though Macron pleaded with him not to and struggled to replace him. Van, something's making his ministers turn on him. What is it?
Oh, I think President Macron is learning. I think this president is good at learning. He's learning from his past mistakes. He's thinking that surrounding himself with people who don't really agree with him or don't have the same agenda is not a good idea after all. He has decided to surround himself now with people who are more like-minded, people who share his goals, believe in the same way of working.
Van Mergadicium, Alexei Poulain, thank you very much. That is the politics out of the way. Appreciate your contributions to the Nexus. Let's switch to the economy now. And President Macron promised to shake things up by reforming the labour market and cutting business taxes, but unemployment remains about the same. Take a look at this. France's rate there, around about just over 9%, far worse than the UK, the United States, and, well, close to triple that of Germany. And yet, President Macron gives the impression it's easy for young people to get a job. But is it? Well, we sent one of our young producers to Paris and challenged her to get a job or else.
Well, fine. I'm off to Paris to see if I can get a job. Youth unemployment in France is a hefty 20%. But President Macron says getting a job is easy. Why did the Frenchman cross the road? Maybe it's because his president told him to.
Je traverse la rue, je vous en trouve, ils veulent simplement des gens qui sont prêts à travailler.
Sounds like you've touched a nerve, Manu. Let's see what Paris has to offer. Other than pastries. Okay, enough mucking around. Time to get serious. Now, I'm a journalist, but Macron said I should work in whatever industry will have me. So I'm making my way to the heart of France's bustling service industry. Hotels, cafes, restaurants, all just waiting to employ me. But first, I'll ask a local what they think of my resume.
J'ai mon CV ici. Est-ce que vous pensez que ça serait bon ou pas? Très bien, très bien.
Not quite the reaction I was hoping for. I'm handing out resumes wherever I can, but with no cafe experience, I don't think I'll be getting an offer anytime soon. In the meantime, I'm going to ask some young Parisians what they think of Macron's comments.
Voilà, et en fait Macron, oui, en disant ça, il s'éloigne totalement de la réalité, de la vie quotidienne des gens.
Il schématise. Oui, c'est facile de traverser pour trouver un emploi, mais ce ne sera pas un emploi stable, ce ne sera pas rémunéré selon nos compétences.
En disant ça, il dit des bêtises.
Et je pense aussi que c'est un président jeune, mais qu'il a du mal à comprendre les jeunes.
Je suis à la Sorbonne, j'entends M1, mais pour trouver un stage, c'est vraiment la galère. Mais bon, est-ce que c'est spécifique à Macron ou est-ce que c'est le système français qui est comme ça, les pistons, bon.
Well, it all sounds a bit grim. And as the hours roll past, I still haven't had a job offer. Perhaps getting a job in France is a little more complicated than crossing the street. Well, I guess I'll return to London to beg Matt for my job back.
No chance, Hannah. Well, let's bring in our second pair of guests now. We have Craig Carlson. He's our classic American in Paris. He's a restaurateur there and has also found time to write Pancakes in Paris, a book about doing business in France. And we also have Charles Capitas, a French-American born in Paris, who's studying at Tulane University in New Orleans. That's right, isn't it? You were born in Paris?
Yes.
Well, I have to ask you, Charles, you've gone from beautiful Paris all the way over to the United States. What is it about the French educational system that makes you feel so restricted and confined?
The French measure failures and the Americans measure success. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to leave. The idea of staying in France and being taught in a very French thinking way was not what I wanted. I wanted something completely different, and I didn't.
Do you feel that in France you very much get pigeonholed from an early age, and that is the stream you have to stay in? Is that the problem?
It is a problem, especially depending on what you want to do in life. If you're a medical student, you want to stay in France, but after medical school, you leave France. For me, in my case, I'm a linguistics major. I want to travel the world. I want to speak many languages. But that's the thing. I'm very restricted in France. If I had decided to stay in France, I know very well that I would have been in a very bad school. Not an amazing school, because there's like only just like 4 good schools in France, and they're very hard to get into. And I went to bilingual school, and the French do not want bilingual people or internationals, for example, who are not French enough. And that's exactly why I just didn't feel like they wanted me. And I felt that, especially at Tulane or, in the United States, the amount of opportunity and how people are like, if you're ready to work, they will there's going to be opportunity for you. In France, it's not like that. They've already chosen you at a young age. And I just did not appreciate that. And then I was lucky enough to go to the United States.
I see. And actually, we were talking earlier in the program about how Emmanuel Macron went to all the great universities and is now set for life. But you are, Charles, going to miss out on some great holidays. Let me go through what you could have won if you'd stayed in France. Here we go. So working in France, 35-hour working week, 25 days paid holiday, 11 paid public holidays on top of that, bonus days awarded for taking time off if you don't do it during the summer, and bonus days awarded for working more than 35 hours per week, right? And if you game the system enough, you could probably wind up with around 9.5 paid weeks holiday a year. Charles, you're going to miss out. You sure you don't regret going to the States?
No, I don't regret it. I mean, vacation's great and all, but that's one of the reasons why France is not really moving economically. Employing people in France is expensive.
That's what we're going to get on to Charles, actually. Let's do that. So the other direction now, a man who went from the United States to France. With holidays like that, how can you afford to employ anyone, Craig?
Well, you know, the holidays, believe it or not, I can manage that. That's not so much a problem. And believe me, I know about the 5-week vacations and all this. The hardest is just there's no flexibility in the way we do scheduling and the way we hire to cover the people on vacation. So I end up working quite a bit when people are gone. Right now, in fact, my manager's gone for 2 weeks, so I'm covering for him. I was covering for a waiter last week. We can get into that if you want to.
Yeah, well, I want to ask you, what is the major difference between hiring and firing in the United States, where you're from, and France?
Right. First, here, you're seen automatically as the exploiter, and people automatically, the worker, the lawyers, the whole system is that we're out to get them, you know? And so in the States, you know, people want to work. You know, I started working when I was in, 16 years old. Worked through college and this kind of thing. Here, it's not the same mentality, and I think, and over there is where you can, because it's so flexible, you can staff a lot more. We're always sort of short-staffed. I saw that report you did. It was hilarious because we've had a haunted sign on our door for going on 10 years. We never take it off.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of turnover. We're always looking for people.
The culture is quite different, isn't it, Craig? I mean, you were saying that when you hire someone, well, tell us about it. You hired someone and they got past the initial temporary phase, and then their attitude changed. Tell us about that.
Exactly. I didn't know this when I went over as an American, and my very first full-time employee, I didn't realize I had to do an entire contract, you know, a very, very detailed contract. And in there was a 2-month trial period.
Right.
And at the end of the trial period, suddenly his behavior changed. He had a very bad attitude, coming in late, just all kinds of things. At the end of the shift, one particular shift where he got really aggressive, I took him outside and I said, you know, at the end of this, you're gone, you're fired. And he took me to court. It went on for 2 years, and he won. He had barely been with us 2 months, almost put me out of business. But of course, the French had to. They said I was very lucky because now I knew how the system worked. So you know,
so the French
I was
system
lucky my first employee
is very much in favour of the employee over the employer. But Macron has he's made a few reforms, hasn't he? He's made it easier to hire and fire. He's reduced taxes on businesses, and he's now chipping away at the pension entitlement. Do you feel the difference in the last 18 months since Macron's been in charge?
You know, I looked into this and I talked to my associate who's French, and it's not true that you can fire people easily. What he's doing is that people can quit easier.
Right.
Which is not a great business model, because what happens is some staff will come up to me and they're like, you know, I don't want to work anymore, but if I quit, I won't get unemployment. So can you fire me? And that's kind of a trap. Because if you got to put a whole dossier together, and inevitably they'll take you to court. You know, there's a danger of taking you to court, and they'll always win something 99% of the time. So some of the other reforms that are good, he is putting a cap. Now, for example, that person that I fired, the first employee, he wouldn't have been able to sue me for as much.
Right.
So that's a little bit of a relief.
You're still tied up by that enormous book, the Code du Travail. Let's have a look at this. This is huge. Right, so you take a look from how, over the years, it has grown. Look, 78, 88, 98, 2010, and apparently it weighs 1,450 grams. Anyway, that's beside the point. Doesn't this sort of amount of regulation of business drive you crazy?
Well, it does, because I'm constantly talking with my lawyer, because there's contradictions all the time. You know, for example, I have someone right now who has just disappeared. He hasn't shown up for a few weeks. And we got a little email saying, oh, you know, you might be having some psychological problems. And I'm talking to my lawyer. I can't do anything about it right now. My hands are tied.
Charles, I want to ask you something. A while ago, President Macron came to the United States. He's trying to capture the attention of people around your age, American students, and he was trying it on again. He was trying to be cool and down with the young kids and so on. Have a listen to this attempt at humour.
And don't believe those who say that's the rule of the game. Don't question the rule of the game. It's always been like that. You have to follow these rules. That's bull.
Well, look what got the applause there. What do you think, Charles? Do you think that he is a new Brum in France and that he wants you all to break the mold? Or do you think that's just a pipe dream?
What I think is he thinks he knows what the French want. He thinks he knows what the common folk want, but he doesn't. He has this kind of a Napoleonic complex in my mind.
Just like you, Charles, it seems when he goes to the United States, he seems and feels more free himself. Let's go back to Craig for a final answer. Craig, do you have any hope that France will change?
You know, I have some hope. That's the American in me. And listen to Charles, I think it's going to be with the young people generation coming up.
Well, on that hopeful note, Craig, looks like you're the future, Charles. You're going to go back and help revitalize your country with other people who are traveling around the world. Thank you very much, Charles and Craig. Appreciate it. Well, that's all for now. Thank you to our guests. Thank you also for watching. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel for all the latest episodes and see you next week. À bientôt.